Welcome, dear dreamer, to a journey through forgotten pages and quiet corners. Tonight, we step with Elara into an old library where shadows linger between shelves, and every book holds a secret. In this story, she discovers the power of memory, the light that lives within every word, and the courage to carry stories forward. Let your imagination wander and listen closely, for the library is alive, and it remembers all who enter. If you enjoy drifting through these enchanted stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the little bell, so you never miss another dream whispered by the candlelight. Elara and the Mystery in the Old Library. Part 1. The Door That Wasn't There. The town of Elara rested by the edge of the sea, wrapped in the hush of late evening. Lanterns glowed along its narrow streets, their light trembling on cobblestones still wet from the afternoon rain. Beyond the last row of houses, an old hill rose against the horizon, crowned by a building that most people pretended wasn't there. They called it the Old Library. Some whispered it had been built centuries ago by the scholars of the First Age. Others claimed it was never built at all, that it simply appeared one night, whole and complete, as if it had always been waiting. Elara heard its name for the first time from a fisherman in the harbor tavern. He spoke of it half in jest, half in fear, saying that lights sometimes flickered in its windows, though no one had lived there for generations. She smiled politely, thinking it only a superstition. But that night, as she walked along the quiet shoreline, something in the wind called to her, a faint echo, like pages turning far away. It wasn't curiosity that drew her to the hill. It was recognition. The path wound upward between gnarled trees and wild rosemary. The scent of salt lingered in the air. As Elara climbed, the world below disappeared into mist, and a soft silence took its place. The kind of silence that feels alive, like breath held between heartbeats. When she reached the top, the moon had risen, silvering the cracked stone walls of the forgotten building. Vines draped its facade, and shattered windows glimmered faintly, reflecting candlelight that could not be there. She stepped closer. There was no entrance, only a long, seamless wall of ancient stone. But as she brushed her hand across it, the surface rippled, as though water hid beneath the texture. And then, a sound, quiet but clear, the slow creak of hinges. Before her eyes, the outline of a door began to form, tall, arched, carved from oak, that glowed faintly with golden veins. It wasn't appearing so much as remembering itself into being. Elara's breath caught. For a moment she hesitated, her reflection faint in the wood, uncertain, yet drawn forward. The handle was cold beneath her fingers, etched with unreadable letters that shimmered briefly before fading away. The door opened inward with a sigh. She stepped inside. The air smelled of parchment and candle wax. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched far beyond sight, their spines marked with languages long forgotten. Floating dust caught the candlelight like drifting embers. Somewhere above, a great clock ticked slow, deliberate, as though counting something older than time. Her footsteps echoed softly. The floor beneath her glowed faintly, a mosaic of symbols and constellations that shifted when she moved. Each shelf seemed to breathe, expanding slightly as she passed, and she felt the faint warmth of the books, as if they recognized her presence. Elara reached out to touch one. The cover pulsed beneath her hand. The whisper came at once, a gentle murmur, like wind through reeds. "Do you remember me?" She drew her hand back, startled. The voice faded, leaving only the rustle of pages. She turned in a slow circle, her eyes wide. Every corridor led to another. Every stairway split into two more. The space seemed endless, like a dream constantly rearranging itself. Somewhere deep within, a candle flickered, though she hadn't lit it. She followed the glow, her fingers trailing along the wooden railing of a spiral staircase. The higher she climbed, the quieter it became. The light led her into a vaulted chamber at the heart of the building, a reading hall filled with floating candelabras. Hundreds of books hovered in the air, slowly revolving, as if caught in a slow, eternal dance. In the center of the hall stood a single lectern, carved from marble, so pale it almost looked translucent. On it rested an open book, its pages turned on their own. Elara stepped closer. The writing shimmered like ink seen through water. It wasn't a language she could read, yet she felt its meaning, not in her mind, but in her chest, as though her heartbeat followed its rhythm. "Welcome back, Keeper of Light." Her throat tightened. She hadn't heard that title in many nights. The words faded, leaving only silence. "Who wrote this?" she whispered aloud. The answer came from behind her. "The library writes what must be remembered." Elara turned. A figure stood among the shadows between shelves, tall, cloaked in gray, his face half hidden by the hood. In one hand he held a lantern, its flame pale and steady. His eyes were the color of ash and reflection. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "I am the curator," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of dust and time. "And you are far from where you began." "I was drawn here," Elara replied, "by something calling me." He nodded once, as though that were expected. "The library remembers those who remember it. Most who enter do not see the door at all." She looked around, wonder filling her gaze. "It's alive." "It always has been," he said. "But life needs memory to endure. Without readers, the words forget themselves. That is when the corridors begin to fade." A chill ran through her as she noticed one shelf nearby. Its books dim, the leather cracked, the titles erased. Can they be restored? The curator studied her for a long moment. Perhaps, but not without cost. Before she could ask more, a faint sound echoed through the hall, a flutter, a whisper like paper tearing. One of the hovering books fell to the ground, its cover splitting open. From within its pages seeped a dark mist, curling and shifting like smoke alive with thought. Elara took a step back. "What is that?" He raised his lantern, the light revealing countless tiny fragments swirling inside the mist. Letters, sentences, half-formed words. "The forgotten," he said quietly. "Echoes of what was never finished." The mist recoiled from the lantern's glow, slinking back into the corners of the hall. When it vanished, the silence returned, heavier than before. The curator turned to her again. "You should not be here yet. The library has been waiting, but it remembers differently each time. Follow me before it decides to close the door." He began to walk toward a corridor that seemed to breathe in and out with each step. Elara hesitated only a moment before following. As they moved deeper through the shifting corridors, the candles dimmed, replaced by orbs of faint blue light drifting through the air like small wandering souls. The curator's footsteps made no sound. He spoke as they walked. "Every book here contains not just a story, but the memory of the one who read it. Over time, those memories blend. The library becomes a map of hearts and thoughts, a living record of everything once imagined." She listened in silence, the words sinking deep. At last, they reached a set of double doors made of blackened glass. Strange symbols pulsed faintly across their surface, like constellations rearranging themselves. The curator rested his hand upon them. "Beyond this lies the central hall. Few are permitted to see it." The doors opened without a sound. A vast expanse stretched before them, shelves upon shelves spiraling upward until they vanished into a faint golden mist. At the center, beneath a great dome carved with star patterns, stood a pedestal. Upon it rested a massive book bound in silver and glass, sealed shut by strands of light. Elara felt its pull instantly, deep and magnetic. "What is that?" she breathed. "The Codex of Forgotten Dreams," said the curator. "But it will not open for me." He turned toward her, the lantern flame reflected in his eyes. "Perhaps it waits for someone else." Elara felt the faint hum beneath her feet, a pulse that matched her heartbeat. The air around her shimmered faintly, as if recognizing something long lost. The curator stepped back. "When you are ready, the library will show you why you came." And with that, he vanished between the shelves, leaving only the faint echo of his lantern's glow. Elara stood alone in the vast hall, surrounded by the quiet breathing of the books. The codex pulsed once, its seal flickering like a heartbeat, and then from somewhere deep within, she heard the whisper again, soft, familiar, and filled with quiet longing. "Do you remember me?" Part 2. The whispers between pages. The air in the central hall felt alive. Even in stillness, there was movement, a low rhythm pulsing beneath the silence, like a heart deep inside the walls. Elara stood before the great codex, the mirrored surface of its cover glimmering faintly in the candlelight. She reached out, but the moment her fingers neared the light-woven seal, the energy shifted. A faint sigh rippled through the room. Every book on every shelf shivered at once, pages fluttering as if stirred by an unseen wind. The sound filled the hall, not loud, but endless, like countless breaths overlapping in a chorus of memory. She withdrew her hand, the codex stilled. For a long while, she only listened. The library seemed to speak in layers, 1,000 tiny murmurs threading through one another. Some sounded like laughter, others like fragments of lullabies. She turned, tracing the sound through an arched doorway that hadn't been there before. The corridor beyond was narrower and lined with tall stained glass windows. The moonlight that filtered through them wasn't ordinary. It carried shapes of words instead of colors. Lines of forgotten languages slid slowly across the floor like drifting shadows. Elara followed them deeper into the library. At times, the walls would shift imperceptibly, the shelves bending away as though making space for her. Once, she glimpsed a figure at the far end of the passage, a child made of ink and smoke, reading from a torn book. When she blinked, it was gone, leaving only the scent of old parchment in the air. Something about the place felt strangely tender. The library wasn't merely haunted, it was lonely. She found a spiral staircase descending into dimness and followed it down. The lower chambers smelled of cedar and dust. Here, the shelves grew taller, the air thicker, and the whispering more distinct. As she brushed her hand along the railing, faint sentences began to emerge from the noise. Partial phrases, incomplete thoughts, emotions without owners. Don't forget me. It was meant to end differently. We waited so long. Her breath caught. She felt those words inside her bones, like the echo of her own dreams long after waking. At the base of the stairs stood a circular reading room, lit by floating lamps that drifted near the ceiling. Tables were scattered across the space, each covered in books left open mid-sentence, quills still resting beside half-finished pages. The lamps flickered as she entered. A faint sound startled her, the rhythmic scratch of a pen. She turned toward the far corner, where a figure sat at a desk, bent over a book. The curator. He didn't look up as he wrote. The quill moved rapidly, almost desperately, but the ink it produced faded as soon as it touched the page. You returned, he said without turning. I didn't leave, Elara answered quietly. Few remain long. The library reshapes itself when it is alone. She stepped closer, watching as he lifted his hand from the book. The pages beneath were blank again. It doesn't want to be written, he said softly. These words refuse to stay. They are memories trying to forget themselves. Elara glanced around at the scattered volumes. Are these all unfinished? Yes, he said. Every dream left incomplete, every story abandoned midway. When people stop reading, their memories fade. The words come here, searching for meaning. He finally looked up at her, his eyes dimly luminous. That is why you hear the whispers. They're not speaking to frighten you. They are calling for remembrance. She looked down at one of the open books nearest to her. On its page was a name written faintly in fading ink, Isola. Beneath it, only a few words remained visible. The sea waited, but she never returned. Elara traced the line gently with her fingertip. The letters shimmered faintly, then began to reform, glowing softly before fading again. She whispered, Isola. The library seemed to exhale. For a moment, the air brightened, the faint hum rising like music through the beams. You brought it back, said the curator. Even a single name can keep a story alive for a little longer. He stood, the lantern in his hand, flickering to a cooler hue. There is something else you should see. He led her through a narrow passage, hidden behind a shelf of crumbling manuscripts. The corridor opened into a chamber where the ceiling disappeared into darkness. Strange mechanisms hung suspended above. Chains, pulleys, and clockwork orbs slowly rotating around a central pillar. The pillar was made of black stone, covered in etchings that moved when touched by light. Books were stacked around it, each bound in different material: leather, metal, silk, even glass. Some were open, pages glowing faintly from within. This is the Hall of Echoes, the curator said. Every book here remembers not its story, but its reader. The moments of wonder, sadness, discovery, all preserved. Elara approached one. The cover bore no title, only a small indentation shaped like a hand. Go on, he said gently. She pressed her palm against it. At once, her vision shifted. She saw flashes, a child reading by candlelight, a woman writing letters beside a window, a traveler carrying a small book through storms. None of the faces were familiar, yet she felt their hearts, their quiet devotion to words that had once brought them peace. When she lifted her hand, a tear slipped down her cheek. It's beautiful, she whispered. And tragic, the curator added. Because once forgotten, these memories fade as well. The books remember longer than we do. He studied her expression carefully. You feel it, don't you? The connection. The library calls to those who carry stories within themselves. You have seen many worlds, Elara. That is why it knows your name. She lowered her gaze. If all these books remember, why do they still whisper? Why do they sound afraid? Because they know the end is coming, he said simply. Her eyes lifted sharply. The end. The library is sustained by memory. As people forget, the foundation weakens. The corridors collapse, rooms vanish, voices turn to dust. Even I, his words faltered for a moment, his image flickering faintly. Even I am not immune. I was once a writer. I tried to complete the codex, but it consumed me instead. He turned away, voice softer now. You must not linger too long. The library may decide you belong here as well. Elara felt a shiver trace down her spine. Why does it want to keep people? It doesn't want to, he said. It only wishes not to be alone. It mistakes remembrance for belonging. A low rumble vibrated through the floor. Dust fell from the ceiling as the shelves trembled. Somewhere far away, a deep echo resounded, like a door closing. The curator's lantern flared. It's shifting again. The passage will seal soon. They hurried back toward the main corridor, but the path was no longer the same. The stairwell was gone. In its place stretched a narrow hallway of mirrors, reflecting endless shelves behind glass. Elara caught her reflection in one, but it wasn't her as she stood now. It was her sitting at a desk somewhere in the future, writing by candlelight. The reflection lifted its head, as if hearing her thoughts, then slowly smiled. The image dissolved. She stumbled back. What was that? The library shows possibilities, the curator murmured. It reflects what might yet be written. When they reached the upper level again, the air had grown colder. The candle flames bent toward the same direction, as though drawn by a breath from somewhere deep ahead. Elara turned to the curator. You said the codex consumed you. What does it do? He hesitated. It records everything that has ever been imagined, every world, every word, every dream. But to open it is to see not only what was, but what might still come. No one can hold that much memory without losing themselves. She looked toward the distant glow of the grand hall. Then, why does it call to me? Because, he said quietly, you are not here to be consumed. You are here to remember. The whispering grew again, louder now, surrounding them. Thousands of voices speaking at once, overlapping like waves of thought. And beneath them all, one voice rose clearer than the rest, soft but insistent, echoing from deep within the walls. Find the page that remembers you. Elara closed her eyes. The sound faded into her heartbeat. When she opened them again, she stood alone. The curator had vanished. Only his lantern remained, flickering beside an open corridor that led deeper into the heart of the library. The pages around her rustled gently, like 1,000 sighs, breathing in unison. She picked up the lantern and began to walk toward the whisper that carried her name. Part 3. The Codex of Forgotten Dreams. The corridors narrowed as Elara followed the sound. The glow of the lantern moved with her, a pale gold halo breathing softly through the dark. Around her, the shelves seemed endless, rows of books without titles, their bindings faintly pulsing like distant heartbeats. The whisper that had called her name grew clearer. It came not from any single direction, but from within the air itself, as though the library had found its voice again. You remember us. You carried us. Elara slowed her steps. The floor beneath her shimmered faintly, and faint letters appeared glowing words forming beneath her feet, vanishing as soon as she lifted each step. She couldn't read them, yet she understood. They were fragments of everything she'd ever felt while reading. Wonder, sorrow, hope. The hall opened at last, into a wide chamber she hadn't seen before. It was circular, lined with massive stone columns entwined with vines of golden light. The ceiling was lost in shadow. In the center stood a pedestal of white marble, surrounded by an invisible current that made the air hum like a faint song. Upon it rested the Codex of Forgotten Dreams. Elara approached slowly, the sound of her heartbeat blending with the deep, rhythmic pulse of the room. The codex was larger than any book she had ever seen, its cover mirrored like liquid silver, reflecting her face, but also something more. Faint outlines of scenes she recognized, the sea cliffs where she once stood, the valley of starlit threads, the forest where she first found courage. When she drew nearer, the reflections shifted. She saw faces she didn't know, places she'd never been. Yet each one stirred something familiar within her, like dreams she might once have lived. She reached out and touched the surface. A ripple of light spread outward, lifting the dust from the pedestal and scattering it into tiny glowing motes. The air thickened, heavy with warmth and memory. The mirrored surface melted into translucence, and slowly the book opened. The first page was blank. Then, as if waking, lines of golden ink began to flow across it, forming words that shimmered and rearranged themselves, changing faster than she could read. Her breath caught. For a moment, she saw an image within the text, herself, walking through a vast field beneath a rising dawn, a lantern in her hand. Then the image changed, showing her standing in the hall where she was now, reading the very book before her. It was recording her. The codex pulsed again, brighter now, and Elara felt the strange sensation of being drawn inward. Her thoughts scattered, not in confusion, but as though the book was gently opening her memories like its own pages. Scenes from her journey drifted before her eyes. The moonlit shore, the whispering forest, the hall of starlight threads. But there were others, too, ones she had not yet lived. A bridge suspended in light, a city made of glass, a face in the distance turning toward her, smiling, though she could not see who it was. The library's hum deepened. She whispered, "What are you showing me?" A faint voice answered, not the curator, but something older, the memory of all that was dreamed and left unfinished. "You are part of it now." The candlelight around her flickered violently, bending inward toward the codex, as though drawn by a silent breath. Letters lifted from the pages and began to swirl through the air, circling her in spirals of golden dust. The words brushed against her skin, whispering fragments in passing. "We remember you. You were the voice that carried us. You are what remains when the dream forgets itself." She felt tears fill her eyes, not from sorrow, but from a deep recognition she couldn't explain. The codex turned another page on its own. This one glowed brighter than the rest, the light almost blinding. Shapes began to form within it, flowing rivers of ink that rose into the air and took shape as floating images. Children reading beneath candlelight, artists painting, travelers gazing at stars, countless lives touched by imagination and memory. They shimmered like constellations of thought, each connected to the next by faint silver threads. Elara stepped forward, reaching out toward one. When her fingertips brushed the light, she saw a young woman writing beside a window, whispering words to herself. "I hope someone, someday, remembers this." Elara's voice trembled. "I do." The light pulsed, and the image dissolved into her hand, merging with her heart like a returning memory. The Codex spoke again, though its voice now came from everywhere at once. Every story forgotten leaves a shadow. Every memory unspoken seeks a new home. As it spoke, the mirrors lining the distant walls came alive, each one reflecting a version of her, hundreds of Elaras, each holding a lantern, each walking a different path. In one reflection, she stood in a garden of glowing petals. In another, she crossed a bridge made of crystal light. In yet another, she sat before an open fire, speaking softly to unseen listeners. All of them turned their heads at once, as if sensing her gaze. Their lanterns flickered in unison. Elara stepped back, her heart pounding. "Why are you showing me this?" she whispered. "Because you carry the spark that binds them all. Without memory, they fade. You are their keeper, not of endings, but of beginnings." The words wrapped around her like warmth, and she understood, faintly, quietly, that this codex wasn't a record of what was lost, but a living tapestry of what continued to exist through remembrance. The library didn't trap dreams, it protected them until someone could remember again. The sound of footsteps broke the stillness. Elara turned to see the curator emerging from the shadows, his expression unreadable beneath the pale glow of his lantern. "So it has chosen you," he said softly. "I didn't mean to." He raised a hand gently. "No one ever does. The Codex calls when the balance falters." She looked down at the glowing pages. "It's alive. It remembers everything. But why can't it write what it shows me?" "Because memory alone is not enough," he said. "It needs belief to shape it. That is what was lost." He approached the Codex, his reflection fragmenting across its mirrored surface. "Once, I tried to write a story that would save the library, but I wrote with fear, and fear cannot remember." His eyes lifted to hers. "You are different. You see the light within what is fading." Elara felt the truth of that settle quietly inside her, though she did not yet understand it. The curator placed a hand on the codex's edge. The light dimmed slightly, as if bowing to his touch. "Soon, the shadows will come, the fragments of what was unread. They fear the light because it reminds them of what they lost. When they awaken, you must not run." Her gaze met his. "Then what must I do?" He hesitated before answering. "Read." The Codex turned another page, and the whispering began again, no longer soft, but vast, like 1,000 forgotten voices rising from every shelf. The floor trembled faintly. From the corners of the hall, black mist began to curl and gather. The same dark essence she had seen before, but stronger now, shaped like hands reaching toward the light. The curator lifted his lantern, its glow forming a thin barrier that kept the mist at bay. The unread have awakened. They do not wish to vanish. The Codex's light pulsed again, bright and trembling. The mist recoiled, but grew denser, forming shadowy shapes that flickered like half-drawn memories, faces half-formed, words half-spoken. Elara stepped closer to the Codex. If they are fragments, can they be healed? His answer came quietly. Only if remembered. She placed her hand on the open page. The words beneath her fingers shifted, rearranging themselves into a single line of light that wrapped around her wrist like a ribbon. At that touch, the shadows stilled, the whispering stopped, and the Codex spoke once more, its voice like the breath of the sea at dawn. Then remember us. Elara closed her eyes. Images rushed through her mind, not only of her own journey, but of countless others. Children who once dreamed of stars, wanderers who sought meaning in old words, stories left unfinished but never forgotten. She whispered softly, "You are not lost." The Codex glowed so brightly that the chamber filled with radiance. For one heartbeat, it seemed as if every book in the library exhaled at once. The air shimmered with light, then faded back into silence. When she opened her eyes, the mist was gone. The Codex rested still and quiet, its surface now cool beneath her hand. The curator stood beside her, expression unreadable, though there was a softness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. "You see now," he said, "the Codex doesn't only remember stories, it remembers those who remember." Elara nodded, her heart calm but awake. "Then I will remember." He inclined his head. "And the library will remember you in return." As the candles dimmed to a tranquil glow, she looked once more at the Codex. Its mirrored surface reflected not her face, but a single line of new writing, clear and luminous. Every light begins as a word unforgotten. Part 4. The Shadows of the Unread. The library no longer breathed in whispers, but in silence, heavy and suspended, like a held breath that refused to end. Elara stood in the center of the vast reading hall, where the moonlight had dimmed into a pale echo. Around her, shelves stretched endlessly, the books now motionless, their pages sealed tight as if listening. The Codex still lay open before her, its mirrored pages trembling faintly. But now, instead of reflections, the surface had turned opaque, as if the ink within had retreated deep inside. Elara reached out, fingers hovering above it, but the air between her hand and the page pulsed, warm, alive, resisting touch. From somewhere in the dark, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps emerged. They echoed across the marble floor, though no shadow followed. "Elara," came the voice of the curator, though thinner now, and distant, as though carried through water. She turned toward the sound. "The library is changing," she said softly. "What's happening?" "The unread," he whispered. "They have stirred." The word lingered like ash in the air. He appeared beside her, pale light caught in human shape, robes woven from threads of smoke and dust. His lantern flickered weakly, its flame now tinted with a deep indigo hue. Behind his calm, his expression carried an exhaustion older than stone. "When a story is forgotten," he said, "it begins to unravel. But when it is never told at all, it becomes something else." He gestured toward the far end of the hall, where shadows pooled between the shelves. They were not merely darkness, they had form. Thin, wavering silhouettes that trembled like candle flames in the wind. Some stretched across the walls, others clung to the edges of books, their faces featureless, yet heavy with yearning. "The unread," he murmured again. "Fragments of beginnings that were never finished. Their ink was never touched by light." Elara felt a chill that did not come from the cold. "Can they harm us?" "They do not know harm," the curator said. "Only hunger." A faint whisper followed his words, hundreds of overlapping voices, too faint to understand, murmuring all at once. Elara turned, and one of the shadow figures drifted closer. Its shape bent like liquid smoke, forming something almost human, almost pleading. She could feel it reaching toward her, not for her body, but her memory. It brushed against her sleeve, and in that instant, her mind filled with fleeting visions. A child standing in a field, a quill left on a desk. A story that began with once upon, then nothing. The vision vanished, leaving a hollow ache behind. She staggered back. "They're empty," she whispered. "They are what remain when imagination is silenced," said the curator. "Every book here has known both life and loss. But these are the words that never found a reader." Elara looked around. The entire library seemed to breathe now in a slow rhythm, the shelves shifting, wood creaking softly, air bending under unseen weight. The floating orbs of light began to fade, replaced by slow-moving ribbons of shadow that draped from ceiling to floor. "What do they want from me?" she asked. The curator hesitated. Perhaps to be seen, to be remembered. The shadows began to move faster, drawn toward the codex. The mirrored book trembled again, and for a heartbeat, Elara saw movement within it, outlines forming, reaching, pressing against the surface from inside. "The codex binds them," said the curator, his voice trembling. "It absorbs all that is unwritten, but it can no longer contain them." The room was filled with wind, though no doors opened and no windows broke. The pages of thousands of books fluttered wildly, as though caught in a storm. Candles bent sideways, their flames stretching thin before snuffing out one by one. The shadows thickened into figures, circling Elara and the curator in a spiral. "What happens if they escape?" she asked. "Then stories themselves will begin to fade," he said. "Every world will blur. Every voice will fall silent." Elara's heart beat hard beneath her cloak. Then we must stop them. He shook his head. No, you cannot stop them by force. You must finish them. She stared. Finish them. They are beginnings left abandoned, he said. Each one longs for an ending, a purpose. You are a keeper of light. You can give them what I could not. He stepped back, his lantern flickering violently, the flame sputtering toward darkness. But be warned, to write an ending for the unread is to give part of yourself away. The library moaned, long and low. Elara looked down at the codex, now glowing faintly with blue light beneath her hands. She opened it once more. The mirrored pages rippled like a pond under rain. Instead of reflections, words began to appear, sentences incomplete, paragraphs that broke off mid-thought. They were voices trapped between existence and silence. She read them aloud. A whisper followed each line she spoke, as if answering her. The air around her grew heavy with an unseen presence. Then, slowly, she began to write, her hand moving as if guided by something beyond her will. The quill on the nearby desk lifted and floated toward her, its tip shining faintly. She took it, and the ink that bled from it shimmered like silver thread. One by one, she finished the sentences that had been abandoned. Each time she did, one shadow faded into mist, released, at peace. But the more she wrote, the dimmer the lantern's light became. The curator's voice trembled. Enough, Elara. You're giving too much. She looked up, tears forming in her eyes. If I stop, they'll remain trapped. If I continue, maybe they'll finally rest. He closed his eyes, grief passing through his face like the shadow of a cloud. I once tried to do what you are doing, he said. I failed, and the Codex bound me here. My unfinished words chained me to this place. The library shuddered, the sound like thunder rolling through the shelves. Dust poured from the ceiling in quiet streams. Books fell open all around them, releasing plumes of light and darkness that collided midair. You can still be free, she whispered to him, if I can finish what you began. He looked at her, truly looked, as though for the first time since she arrived. Then, slowly, he nodded. Then finish it, he said. Finish the Codex. Set us all free. The last candle went out. Only the silver glow from the Codex remained, illuminating Elara's face. She wrote faster now, her breath shallow, her heart echoing in her ears. The shadows screamed, a sound like wind tearing through hollow wood, desperate, yearning. And with each word she wrote, they fell silent, one by one, until only a single figure remained, the curator himself. He smiled faintly, the sadness leaving his eyes. Thank you, he whispered, for remembering what was forgotten. Then he, too, began to fade, his lantern dissolving into a soft shimmer of light that drifted upward, joining the countless motes swirling above. The Codex closed itself, the mirrored cover sealing with a sound like the sigh of the sea. Elara stood alone in the silent hall, surrounded by stillness. She placed a hand on the Codex's cover, and whispered, "Rest now." The light dimmed, the ink inside settling into calm. Somewhere far above, dawn was beginning, faint gold threading through the high windows of the old library. Elara looked around. The shadows were gone. The books were still once more, their spines gleaming faintly in the returning light. And yet she felt it, the echo of something vast and unseen, the quiet heartbeat of the place. It was no longer haunted, only waiting. She took a deep breath, gathering the quill and placing it beside the codex. Then she whispered, "Every story deserves to be finished." As she turned toward the grand door, she noticed something new carved into its wood. A single line in delicate script. When the last shadow fades, the storyteller remains. She smiled, her steps soft as she left the hall behind. The air felt lighter, the silence gentler, and as the door closed behind her, the library whispered one final sound, the faint turning of a page, as if the story had already begun again. Part 5. The Light Between Stories. Morning unfurled softly over the hills, pale gold mist spilling through the narrow streets of the town below. From afar, the old library appeared silent, its windows blank and still, as though no one had ever entered. But inside, beneath the fatting breath of night, a single flame yet lingered, the last trace of a story fulfilled. Elara stood in the grand hall where it had all begun. Dust motes drifted through columns of morning light like suspended stars. The codex rested on the marble desk before her, its mirrored surface now calm, no longer rippling with restless ink. For a long while she simply watched it, listening to the hush. The air carried that rare silence that exists only after something sacred has ended, not empty, but full of quiet meaning. She reached out, fingers brushing the book's cool surface. It pulsed faintly beneath her touch, a heartbeat soft and steady. In its stillness, she sensed gratitude not from words, but from the space between them. "You're free now," she whispered, "and so is he." The curator's lantern lay beside the codex, its glass cracked, its flame gone. Yet the metal frame shimmered faintly, as though remembering light. Elara lifted it, holding it up to the dawn. A thin beam slipped through the broken glass and scattered into a spectrum of gentle color. It reminded her of what he had said. Every story you read leaves a shadow. She wondered then if every story she touched also left a light. Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it the scent of sea salt and parchment. It swept through the broken windows, stirring pages on forgotten desks, rustling shelves like an exhale. The library seemed to breathe again, alive, but changed. Elara stepped forward. As she walked, the floor beneath her creaked softly, like a stage awakening after slumber. The shelves no longer loomed, but seemed to lean inward, as if listening. Books that had once whispered now remained peacefully closed, content in their rest. Her footsteps led her to the far end of the hall, where a small door stood ajar, one she hadn't noticed before. Light spilled from its frame, pale and golden. Curiosity guided her once more. She pushed the door open. Beyond it was a narrow spiral staircase leading downward, the stone worn smooth by centuries of passing. She descended, her hand grazing the cool rail, each step echoing into the unseen. At the bottom lay a small circular chamber. Unlike the grand halls above, this room was intimate, almost tender. Candles floated in glass spheres around the ceiling, their flames reflecting in a shallow pool of water that covered the floor. At its center, on a simple wooden pedestal, rested a single book. It was small, bound in deep blue leather, corners gilded in silver. The title on the cover was faint, as though written in breath. The Chronicles of Elara. She froze. The air shimmered faintly around it. Her reflection rippled across the water, blending with the words. Carefully, she stepped closer, each motion slow, reverent. When she reached the pedestal, she laid a hand upon the cover. It was warm. She opened it. The first page was blank, the second as well. But on the third, words began to appear, written not in ink, but in light. They described a girl with curious eyes who had wandered through forests of dreams, crossed rivers that whispered time's forgotten songs, and once followed the path of starlight to speak with a weaver beyond the horizon. They spoke of courage born from stillness, and of kindness that healed what memory had left undone. Elara read in silence, heart swelling. These were her journeys, her choices, her light. Yet the pages did not stop there. Beyond the words she recognized, new lines unfurled glimpses of places she had not yet seen. A desert under glass skies, a city made of echoes, a bridge of fire and mist. She smiled faintly. So the story continues, she murmured. As she spoke, the light on the page brightened. It rose from the paper, swirling into the air, wrapping her in a gentle warmth. For a moment, she felt weightless, surrounded by every sound she had ever loved, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of waves, the heartbeat of the world itself. A voice quiet, neither male nor female, whispered through the light. Every ending is an opening, every silence a beginning. You are the keeper of both. Elara closed her eyes. The warmth deepened, then slowly faded. When she opened her eyes again, the chamber had changed. The candles were gone. The pool of water was still, its surface now reflecting a wide open sky, no ceiling above, only light. She stood there for a moment, watching the sky ripple across the floor. Then she closed the book gently, cradling it to her chest. "I'll keep telling the story," she said softly. "For them, for all of us." When she returned up the stairs, the library was no longer dim. Sunlight poured freely through the high windows, illuminating every shelf. Dust glowed like golden mist. The smell of old pages had transformed, no longer musty, but sweet and alive. At the threshold, she turned once more. Where the codex had rested, there was now only a faint outline of light. The pedestal stood empty, but etched into the marble beneath it were new words, carved by invisible hands. To remember is to keep the light alive. Elara bowed her head, her heart steady and calm. As she stepped through the grand doors, they opened with surprising ease, as though the building itself was letting her go. Outside, the air was bright, the sea beyond shimmering like glass. The town below seemed unaware of what had passed, fishermen calling to one another, children chasing waves, the rhythm of life continuing as always. Elara paused at the top of the hill, looking back. The library stood quiet, but something about it had softened, the edges less severe, the stone warm in the morning light. And though no one else could hear it, Elara thought she caught a faint, familiar sound drifting through the wind, the gentle turning of a page. She smiled. From her satchel, she took a small scrap of parchment, one she always carried for thoughts that found her on the road. She wrote only a single line: "The light between stories is where we find ourselves again." She folded it and tucked it between the pages of the Chronicles of Elara. Then she began walking down the hill, her cloak trailing through the dew-damp grass, her lantern catching the sun as it rose. The sea glittered ahead, endless and inviting. In its reflection, she saw clouds forming new shapes, as though beckoning her onward. Somewhere beyond that horizon waited the next journey, one she could not yet name, but already felt in her heart. And as she walked, the wind carried her voice, quiet but clear. Where one story ends, another begins. And so, Elara leaves the library behind, carrying with her the light of stories remembered and the hope of tales yet to be told. Every ending is a beginning, and every shadow holds a spark. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can continue exploring the dreamscapes and timeless stories of Candle by the Sea. Sweet dreams, dear listener, until our next adventure.